Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Rumberg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your presenter for today's webcast on productivity metrics. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in our webcast today. And I want to thank Bright Talk for inviting MetricNet to speak on this topic. This is our second webcast of 2020, and you may have noticed that we have adopted a new format for our webcasts this year. We're going to be delivering more webcasts, but they are going to be shorter in length. So instead of 60 minutes, as we've done traditionally, we're going to be doing 30-minute webcasts this year in deference to those who are unable to spend a full hour on a webcast. Now, before we get started, I have just a few administrative announcements to make. During the presentation, all of you will be in listen-only mode. However, if you have any questions during the webcast, you will notice a questions button just above the image of my slides, and during the webcast, you can click that button and type in any questions that you have. I'll wrap up my presentation in about 20 minutes from now to answer any questions that you have typed in during the webcast. Now, just by way of quick introduction, MetricNet's core business is benchmarking. We perform benchmarks for a variety of industries and functional areas. My role in the business is to manage the service desk, desktop support, and contact center benchmarks for MetricNet. Now, if you're interested, you can download today's presentation. Just click the button that says Attachments. You can download a PDF of today's presentation. You can also request a free consultation call from MetricNet. The button is a bit mislabeled. It says Vote, but what you're actually doing when you click that button is requesting a call from MetricNet for a free consultation. And at the conclusion of our webcast today, we would ask you to rate the quality of the webcast by clicking the button that says Rate This. Now, for those who are planning to be at Support World Live in April, which is the premier annual conference for IT service and support, I would invite you to attend one or both of my sessions. I'll be delivering a 2-day workshop on metrics at the beginning of the conference and then presenting a session on employee engagement towards the end of the conference. Likewise, if you're planning to be at the SDI, Service Desk Institute annual conference in March in the UK, I would invite you to attend any or all of my sessions, including a metrics workshop, a presentation on enterprise services, and a workshop on the ROI of service and support. And finally, if you're going to be at SITS, the premier event for IT service and support in Europe, I will be doing a presentation there on managing service and support as a business. Think internal profit center, managing service and support as a business. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to cover a variety of topics today, and I'm going to start with some material to set the stage for our discussion of productivity metrics. We're going to go through a quick primer on metrics. It turns out that metrics are the linchpin of success in service and support, whether it's IT service and support or a contact center. You cannot achieve world-class performance or continuous improvement unless you mature metrics. We do quite a few benchmarks every year. Collectively, MetricNet has completed more benchmarks than any other organization in this industry. And what we found is that historically, the weakest area in most organizations is their metrics discipline. And that is why we're doing a series of webcasts on metrics and maturing metrics this year. We're going to talk about something called the metrics hierarchy. There are 9 success factors associated with maturing your metrics. We're going to define a metric called agent utilization, analyst utilization for a service desk, agent utilization for a contact center, and technician utilization for desktop support. Utilization is the most important measure of productivity in this industry. We're going to talk about how you can control utilization, what their drivers are, and then towards the end of the presentation today, I'm going to share some benchmarking data with you. So let's start with the basics, the people, process, technology paradigm. Very common in this industry. Most understand this instinctively and intuitively, yet these 3 success factors do not by themselves explain world-class performance among those contact centers, service desks, and desktop support organizations who have achieved world-class performance. What's missing from this paradigm is metrics. Now, we're not suggesting in this chart that metrics are the most important success factor, but what we are suggesting is that they are a foundational discipline. You can have mature human resource practices and policies, good training, good advancement opportunities, career opportunities. You can have excellent processes, and be enabled with the most up-to-date technology, but unless you have a strong foundational discipline in metrics, that is performance measurement and management, it will be difficult to achieve continuous improvement, let alone world-class performance. So we've modified the people process technology pyramid to include metrics because it is a foundational discipline. We believe it's the linchpin of success and continuous improvement for contact centers, for service desks, and for desktop support organizations. And here's the empirical data that backs that up. On this chart, the x-axis represents the maturity of your metrics discipline on a scale of 1 to 5, or 0 to 5, excuse me. 0 means no maturity, basically ad hoc metrics, if any metrics at all. 5 is the most mature. On the y-axis, what we're showing here is the balance score for a set of service desks. The balance score can range from 0 to 100%. Higher scores are better performance, of course. Lower scores are worse performance. And you'll notice that the service desks that are in the range of 0 to 1 on maturity, quite a large number of data points there, roughly half the total data points. We've got 106 data points shown on this page. Maturity 1 to 2, the data points start to thin out. 2 to 3, they thin out even further. Those that have a metrics maturity in the range of 3 to 4, very few. And then those that are above 4 in terms of their metrics maturity, well, you can see here there's only about 8 data points there. So as we move to the right on the x-axis, we see fewer and fewer data points, which means that fewer and fewer organizations, and by the way, this chart holds for contact centers and desktop support organizations as well. The data looks very similar to this. We have fewer and fewer that are on the mature end of the spectrum on the far right, quite a few more data points on the far left. But when we regress these data points against the balanced score, which again ranges from 0 to 100%, higher scores represent better overall performance, lower scores represent worse overall performance, we can clearly see a correlation, meaning that as the metrics mature, the balanced score improves. Now, this is not just a spurious correlation, and by the way, the green straight line is the linear regression through this data, the green dashed line that is. This is not just spurious correlation. This is cause and effect, and there are a variety of statistics that can help us ascertain whether or not this is just correlation or also cause and effect. We use the Granger Test to ascertain the cause and effect nature of two variables when regressed against each other, and we're showing here not just correlation but cause and effect, meaning that as you mature your metrics discipline, you would expect to get better outcomes as measured by the balanced score. And so this is why we believe that metrics are a foundational discipline in any contact center, service desk, or desktop support organization. We've identified 9 success factors when it comes to metrics and maturing metrics. We start with just having key performance indicators. Now, when we work with support organizations, that is desktop support, field services, level 1 service desk, as well as contact centers, 100% of them generally have metrics. When we ask if they use those metrics for reporting, only about 90% are using their metrics for reporting, and only about 80% can actually define all of their metrics, which I find interesting. If you're going to track a metric, you should know what it means. Now, you see on the right-hand side here the adoption rate. Only about 60% of organizations set performance targets for their metrics. This is unfortunate because our belief is that if you're going to track a metric, you should have a performance target for that metric. The one exception would be handle time. We believe that it drives bad behavior if you establish a handle time target. It forces agents or analysts, whether you're in a contact center or service desk, to get on and off the call as quickly as you can, and that's not necessarily the right thing to do. So if you're tracking a metric, with the exception of AHT, average handle time, for a service desk and a contact center, we believe that every metric should have a target associated with it. Now, when we look at understanding cause and effect relationships, only about 30% of organizations understand, for example, what drives cost, what drives quality, what drives utilization, what drives your service levels, what drives your first contact resolution rate, what drives your agent job satisfaction. But understanding those cause and effect relationships is critical to being able to manage your metrics and drive continuous improvement in the organization. We then ask the question, are you using metrics diagnostically? This simply means, are you interpreting the metrics? Do you know where your strengths are? Do you know where your limitations are? And do you know why you have performance gaps, whether they're positive or negative? Only about 20% of organizations can actually claim that they are using their metrics diagnostically. And then prescription simply means, okay, based on the diagnosis, here's what we're going to do to perpetuate the good performance and mitigate or eliminate the negative performance gaps. Then we get to continuous improvement. Only about 10% of organizations that we work with can claim that month over month, year over year, they're seeing improvement in their overall performance. Finally, only about 5% of organizations have leveraged metrics to achieve world-class performance. The irony here, the green arrow on the far right, is that the value of each of these success factors increases as you move up the hierarchy. So just having metrics doesn't do you much good. Using them for reporting, okay, that's, a stepping stone on the way to something better. Defining your KPIs, that's important. But what we're really after is continuous improvement and world-class performance. And unless you achieve those objectives, your metrics aren't helping you very much. Unfortunately, historically, in most organizations, metrics are used primarily for observational purposes. They'll be used to create reports. They'll be used to communicate out the performance of an organization, but they fall short of being exploited diagnostically and prescriptively for the purpose of continuous improvement and ultimately world-class performance. And the series of webcasts we're doing right now on metrics is designed to help you move up this hierarchy, get to the point where you are at least exploiting metrics diagnostically and prescriptively, then measuring month over month, year over year improvement, i.e. continuous improvement, and ultimately being part of that elite 5% class that achieves world-class performance with their metrics. Now, what I'm showing on page 13 is a very common set of metrics for a level 1 service desk. There's a very similar set of metrics for contact centers, very similar set of metrics for desktop support, but there are approximately 25 metrics on this page. I want to be clear, though, that there are hundreds of metrics when it comes to contact centers, desktop support, and service desks. These are the ones that we tend to see most often, and we've organized them into a simple taxonomy. There are cost metrics and quality metrics. Productivity metrics, which is the focus of our discussion today. Productivity is what drives your cost. Analyst metrics or agent metrics if you're in a contact center. Technician metrics if you're in a desktop support organization. Service level metrics, and then contact handling metrics. Now, the importance of cost is as follows. It's one of the two foundation metrics. Think of yin and yang, cost and quality. Cost is your primary measure of efficiency, and specifically cost per unit of work, which would be cost per ticket, cost per contact, or cost per minute of handle time, if you really want to normalize cost. But the opposing metric is quality. These two metrics are in tension, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because it forces you to make intelligent choices about where you're going to make your investments. You're trying to achieve the best quality you can at a reasonable cost. And so what I'm showing on this particular chart, the x-axis shows cost with low cost on the right, high cost on the left. The y-axis shows quality as measured by customer satisfaction. High quality as you move up the y-axis, low quality as you move down the y-axis, and I've got about 100 data points on this chart. Where you want to be is in the upper right-hand quadrant. That is where you are both efficient, meaning low cost, and effective, meaning high quality. It is possible to thread the needle and be both low cost and high quality. But cost cannot be ignored when you're talking about any of these activities. Contact centers, service desks, desktop support. So often, organizations try and focus primarily on quality, delivering a better customer experience, achieving the highest customer satisfaction. But unless you're also keeping an eye on cost, you're not going to achieve this objective of being both low cost and high quality. That's kind of the holy grail of running a support organization, is to be both efficient and effective. And so we think about cost as being one of the primary foundation metrics, the other one being customer satisfaction or some measure of quality like ticket quality or call quality or net promoter score or customer effort score. But cost cannot be ignored when managing these activities because it's critical to manage your costs efficiently given that everyone is operating with a finite number of resources. Now, if we look at a broad cross-section of support organizations, the pie chart looks roughly like this for service desk, desktop support, as well as contact centers. Roughly half, a little bit more, 51% of your costs are your agent costs, that is customer-facing costs. And then we've got another 17% tied up in your supervisor, indirect costs. Think supervisor, team lead, workforce scheduler, QA, QC, and trainer expenses. So 2/3 of your costs are tied up in labor. These are labor-intensive functions. And any serious effort to contain costs has to look at labor productivity. That's why the focus today is on productivity and specifically a metric called utilization. 2/3 of your costs are tied up in labor. And that's why offshoring has been such a mega trend over the last 20 years is because in North America, for example, if you can hire a contact center agent for $35,000, you can probably hire the same agent in India for $7,500 and the same agent in the Philippines for $5,000 a year. So offshoring allows you to reduce the labor cost associated with service delivery. But the key takeaway from this particular chart is that this is a labor-intensive activity and 2/3 of your costs are tied up in your personnel. Fully half of your costs are customer-facing agent costs or analyst costs or technician costs. So let's get back to that data chart where we showed roughly 25 metrics. There is an 80-20 rule when it comes to metrics, and this particular example is for the service desk, but the same would apply for a contact center or for desktop support. The metrics that are highlighted are the ones that really matter. We care about cost per contact. We care about customer satisfaction. Those are the two foundation metrics. The big driver of customer satisfaction is first contact resolution rate, and the big driver of cost is your agent utilization. The higher the utilization, the lower your cost per contact, the lower your cost per minute of handle time. We also care about service levels and then job satisfaction, whether it's technician satisfaction in desktop support, agent satisfaction in a contact center, or analyst satisfaction in a service desk. That metric is a bellwether, meaning that it is a predictive metric. High levels of job satisfaction correlate to high levels of customer satisfaction, and they are counter-correlated with absenteeism and turnover, meaning that the higher the job satisfaction goes, the lower the absenteeism and the lower the turnover. Now, the 6 metrics that are highlighted on this page can be aggregated into a balanced scorecard. That's why the green box in the lower right shows an aggregate metric. A balanced scorecard is simply a way of aggregating the 6 metrics highlighted on this page and creating a single overall measure of performance. We'll have a subsequent webcast on how to create a balanced scorecard, but you may recall very early on we regressed metrics maturity versus the balanced score, and that's what we're referring to here, a single score that ranges from 0 to 100% that gives you an overall performance ranking for your service desk, your contact center, or your desktop support organization. Now, we define analyst utilization, which is our primary productivity metric, in the same way for a service desk, a contact center, or for desktop support. I won't read these definitions for you, but what I will do is explain in lay terms how utilization is measured. And the example I will use here will be for a service desk. The numerator here is work output, and the denominator is work capacity. Work output would be your inbound volume multiplied by average inbound handle time plus your outbound volume multiplied by your average outbound handle time. That's your numerator. That's your work produced. The denominator is the work capacity. We look at the average number of days in a month. It's about 21.5 days. Typical shift length, 7.5 hours. Multiply that by 60 minutes. If you run the math on that denominator, you come up with 9,675 productive minutes or available minutes per month. So let's look at an example using actual numbers. This is for a service desk. We're calculating work output, numerator, divided by work capacity, denominator, and we take the number of inbound contacts multiplied by the handle time of 10 minutes in this example, and we add to that the number of outbound contacts handled by each analyst in a month multiplied by the outbound handle time, which in this example is 5 minutes. Divide that by the denominator, 9,675 typical work minutes in a month, and we come up with a score of 54.4% on utilization. Now, you'll note that we don't back out vacation days, sick days, administrative time, training time, or anything like that. The reason we don't do that is because every organization has different policies around sick leave, vacation time, holidays, administrative time, and so on. And what we don't want to do is have an organization that looks like they've got really good utilization, but it's only because they don't give any time off to their agents for holidays, vacations, and so on. Conversely, we don't want to penalize an organization where they've got a lot of senior analysts that take time off because they've earned 4 weeks of vacation a year, that type of thing. So we don't back out any of the non-productive time, which we would consider to be administrative time, training time, team huddles, for example, sick days, vacation time, holidays, and so on. Worldwide, the average for a service desk is less than 50%, and I'll show you some benchmarking data on this a little bit later, but you can run the math on this. Just do the number of inbound contacts per analyst per month times the inbound handle time, add to that the number of outbound contacts per analyst per month multiplied by the outbound handle time, divide that by 9,675 minutes, and you come up with this 50.4% analyst utilization number. Now, a lot of people think that number looks really low, and maybe it does at first glance, but the reality is the average analyst utilization in a service desk is less than 50%. The average analyst utilization for desktop support is higher than this. You'll see some benchmarking data momentarily, and also for contact centers because the handle times are lower and the scale is generally higher. You also get higher utilizations in contact centers. But this is our primary measure of productivity in an organization. Now, when we look at the cause and effect relationships of metrics, whether it's a contact center, a service desk, or desktop support, we have the two foundation metrics at the top of this chart, cost per unit of work. That might be cost per ticket, cost per inbound contact, or even cost per minute of handle time. Right-hand side, we've got our primary measure of effectiveness, customer satisfaction. Our big driver of cost is analyst or technician or agent utilization. The higher the utilization goes, the lower the cost goes. And then we have some underlying drivers of utilization, which are your scheduling efficiency and your service levels, think ASA or average speed of answer, and your contact abandonment rate. Or your call abandonment rate. Now, this cause and effect diagram is very powerful. It's helpful to understand these relationships, this linkage, if you will. It's a dynamic linkage. It's a living, breathing entity. Anytime one metric moves, they all move. If the analyst utilization improves, your cost goes down. If your service levels become aggressive, analyst utilization will go down and your costs will go up. Likewise, if scheduling efficiency improves, you would expect utilization to improve and your cost to go down. Conversely, if your scheduling efficiency is not very good, meaning that your workforce schedule either has low adherence or it's not a very well-constructed schedule, utilization will go down and your costs will go up. So understanding these cause and effect relationships is very powerful because it puts a great deal of power in your hands to pull the levers you need to pull to achieve desired outcomes. Let me show you some of these correlations. On this particular chart, we have analyst utilization. This would be for a voice channel on the x-axis. This is for a service desk, but it looks almost the same for a contact center. On the left-hand axis, or the y-axis, we have the average cost per minute of handle time. No surprise here, as the utilization increases, the cost per minute of handle time goes down because utilization is your primary measure of efficiency. So low utilization, high cost, high utilization, low cost. Let's look at our next correlation, which would be voice utilization versus schedule adherence. Now, I was a little bit conflicted about which of these metrics to put on the x-axis and which to put on the y-axis because, as you know, the x-axis is the driver or the independent variable. The y-axis is the recipient or the dependent variable. The fact is, utilization, high utilization drives high schedule adherence and vice versa. High schedule adherence drives high utilization. But what you can see here is that as utilization increases, so too does schedule adherence. If we were to flip the axes, what we would see is that as schedule adherence improves, so too does utilization. So we've got a strong correlation there. Let's look at our service levels now. As utilization increases, the average speed of answer goes up. No surprise there because as your analysts become more utilized, they are less available to pick the calls up quickly. We're talking about a voice channel now. So as utilization increases, your speed of answer goes up. Likewise, as utilization increases, your call abandonment rate goes up. Now, I want to be clear that that's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of people overrate the importance of service levels, speed of answer, and call abandonment rate, assuming that an aggressive answer speed and a low abandonment rate leads to high customer satisfaction. That's not really true, though. We found out that the biggest driver of customer satisfaction is, in fact, first contact resolution rate, and the second driver is agent job satisfaction. In other words, customers are willing to forgive you an occasional long speed of answer and an occasional abandoned call if, when they reach an analyst, they reach a competent analyst as measured by a high first contact resolution rate. So we believe that this is an appropriate trade-off to make in the sense that you can back off your service levels a little bit for the sake of getting higher utilization and lower costs. What you gain in terms of higher utilization and lower costs is justified, even though you're going to sacrifice a little bit on your speed of answer and your call abandonment rate. Another key point is this, and we get this question a lot. We're told, for example, by a contact center manager or by a CIO, for example, that we want the lowest ASA, the lowest abandonment rate, the highest customer satisfaction, and the lowest contact center and the highest first contact resolution rate in the industry. Well, you're not going to get that because you have to make trade-offs, as you know. As your utilization goes up, your ASA will increase and your abandonment rate will increase. So you can't possibly expect to have the best utilization, the lowest cost, and at the same time the best speed of answer and the best call abandonment rate. It simply doesn't compute. Now, you don't want to go too far in the other direction. You want to keep your speed of answer at about 30% of your average handle time, and you want to keep your abandonment rate under, rule of thumb, 6 to 8%. So let me share some benchmarking data with you, and then we're going to get to any questions that you might have. For 2019, in a service desk, the average analyst utilization, remember, work output divided by work capacity. The work output includes both inbound and outbound contacts multiplied by their respective handle times. The average is 46.8, almost 47%, but the minimum is 31%. The max is 60%. In a contact center, the average is quite a bit higher. It's about 59% for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Typically, you have better scale there, and typically the handle times are shorter, and it's easier to get better utilization out of your analysts in both of those scenarios. The range is from 41.3 to 80.2%, and in desktop support, highest utilization of all on average at 60%, but it ranges from about 43% to around 72%. So these are just some guidelines to think about when you're establishing targets for your own analyst, agent, or technician utilization. Now, in a minute, I'm going to get to some questions, but before I do so, I want to make a couple of final announcements. Once again, you can download today's presentation. Just go to the button that says Attachments, and you can download a PDF of today's presentation. Our webcasts are always free. We've got the next 5 scheduled, and we're going to continue with our series on metrics that matter. We would encourage you to go to metricnet.com/webcast to sign up for those free webcasts. You can request a free consultation call from MetricNet. Just click the vote button. I know that the moniker on the button doesn't make much sense, but just click that button if you'd like to schedule a free consultation call with MetricNet. We'd ask you to rate our webcast before you exit the webcast today. Just click the button shown here. And keep in mind that Support World Live in April, MetricNet has a significant presence there, at the SDI conference that is going to be in Birmingham, England next month. We have a significant presence there. I'll also be teaching a 2-day metrics workshop at Support World in April, and also delivering a presentation on employee engagement, and then the SITS conference, which is the primary European conference for IT service and support. I'll be speaking there in London in May. Now at this time, I'm going to take some questions. I'm going to open up the Q&A dialog box and answer any questions that you have typed in. If you have any questions that you have not yet typed in, please do so now. So let me go to first question. So when you say you do not back it out, what does that exactly mean? What I'm talking about is that when measuring utilization, I don't make any allowance for sick days, vacation days, training days, administrative time, or team huddles. In other words, you don't get credit for that stuff. In other words, I'm not going to pump up the utilization by taking out productive time based on vacation days, sick days, training time, and administrative time. So my point is that we look at total work produced divided by the available work minutes per month without making any allowance for those other time components I just spoke about. We don't back it out. We don't give you any credit for that. How do you establish performance goals for productivity? That's the next question. If you just go back and look at some of those industry benchmarks, you want to try and be in the top quartile. So look at the best productivity metrics that I showed you. Let me just go back a couple charts and show those to you. What you want to do is look at the best and try and get to within about 90% of those best metrics. So go to the maximum productivity, try and get to about 90% of the max for service desk, contact center, and desktop support. That's a good rule of thumb for getting you into the top quartile. Okay. Next question, you mentioned that ASA should be 30%. Your ASA should be approximately 30% of your average handle time. That's what I was referring there. So if you have a handle time of 9 minutes, 30% of that would be, well, a third of that would be 3 minutes. If you have a handle time of 10 minutes, 30% of that would be 3 minutes. As long as your ASA is under 3 minutes, your customers are not going to penalize you on customer satisfaction. So when you say, let's see, do you establish performance goals? Is it possible for a service group's utilization to be too high? Yeah, the answer is yes. If your utilization is too high, you drive burnout, higher turnover, and lower morale. So you have to be very careful about pushing utilization too high. You don't want to be at the high end of those benchmarks that I showed you, but you don't want to, so 90% is the target that I would establish. Look at the high end, multiply that by 90%. That would be a good target to shoot for. If you're above that, chances are you're going to experience burnout, turnover, absenteeism, and potentially low morale. Next question, what impact will AI have on productivity? It's not going to have any impact on contact center, desktop support, or service and support, that is service desk productivity, except in the fact that more contacts will be handled by AI, so you will need fewer agents to do that kind of thing. But it isn't going to change the utilization number. AI is primarily handling simple things right now like password resets and Microsoft Office and Windows support. So it will over time displace individuals, but it's not going to change the utilization of those that continue to work in the contact center, service desk, or desktop support. Which actions yield long-term productivity improvement? Well, good scheduling, and good schedule adherence improves productivity. Just making sure that the agents understand that the schedule is there for a purpose, and they should be either in a chat line or on the phones or in an email or web-submitted ticket queue in order to maximize their productivity. Simply creating awareness around the importance of utilization as a key driver of cost is critical to managing that utilization over time. Next question, can you speak to utilization versus occupancy? They're relatively unrelated. It's possible to have high occupancy and low utilization. Many organizations confuse these two metrics. Occupancy is simply the time logged into the ACD divided by the time at work, whereas you could have 100% occupancy but 0% utilization. So occupancy will always be greater than utilization. The two are roughly correlated, but very roughly correlated. Don't mistake these two. Occupancy will always be higher than utilization. High occupancy does not necessarily beget or mean high utilization. Question here, what is the target queue time? I assume you mean call in queue. Well, it should be 30% or less of your average handle time. There's a sweet spot there. You don't want it to get too low, otherwise your costs go up, but you also don't want your queue time to be greater than 50% of your handle time because the customers are going to ding you on customer satisfaction. So the target that we suggest is the ASA, or the average response time, should be 30% or less of your average handle time. Average handle time is a question. That varies. It depends on your environment. There are contact centers that have an average handle time of less than a minute, and there are service desks that have an average handle time of greater than an hour. So AHT is simply the combination of talk time, hold time, and ACW after call work time over some period of time. It might be over a month, for example, or over a year, for example. So simple transactions have a lower handle time than more complex transactions. Next question, how do you determine, if you're an extremely technical contact center, what the right benchmark is for you? I'm not sure I understand the question, because the right benchmark really doesn't depend on how complex you are or how simple you are. The targets really don't change that much if you're a service desk. There are a certain set of targets. Same thing if you're a contact center or desktop support. We can discuss this offline. I would encourage you to click the button that says vote, and we can schedule a call, and I can answer this question in more detail. But the benchmarks that you're trying to hit may or may not vary depending upon how technical you are. For example, first contact resolution rate and customer satisfaction don't vary, or targets don't vary based on how technical you are, whereas there are other things like handle time, for example, and utilization that may vary based on the complexity of your environment. Okay, that was the last of the questions. I want to thank all of you once again for attending our webcast today. I would encourage you to sign up for future webcasts. As I mentioned, those are always free of charge, and we've got the next 5 webcasts scheduled. We're going to continue our series on metrics that really matter. So I want to say thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you found our webcast to be informative and insightful. This concludes our webcast. Thank you.